Since I was a little child, I was fascinated with old school entertainment. Ventriloquists, magicians, circus performers, puppeteers, or mimes. With very little effort, they were able to open up the doors of my imagination and put me under their spell. Over time, I lost my interest in that kind of thing and turned more and more to electronics, but I never really forgot about my childhood heroes who I never stopped to admire. But one evening, my admittedly nostalgic fascination with these old arts of entertainment came to a sudden and undeniably disturbing end. I decided to visit one of the last plays of the Fearless Vampire Killers, or Dance of the Vampires, if you want to call it that. I always wanted to watch it, but only found the motivation when I heard that the musical would stop being played in Germany. After an amazing show, I walked the streets of Berlin. I headed for an underground Gothic bar I'm a regular in. I just wanted to finish the day with some beers and in the company of like-minded people. Taking the main streets or public transportation didn't seem to be the right choice for that evening. Weather was fine, not too cold, and the sun still stood high enough to color the sky fittingly blood red. In one of the back alleys, I noticed a bunch of teenagers standing around an old man giggling. I'm a little paranoid in these kinds of situations, so I prepared to intervene if it would have come to show that the old man was being picked on or harassed. I slowly walked towards the group, and to my amazement, found that there was no kind of harassment at all, but entertainment by the old man. The guy swayed around a wooden puppet on strings, let it do some tricks, and told dirty jokes through the wooden doll. I just couldn't bring myself to walk away. I waited and watched the performance for several minutes, fascinated by the dexterity and precision of the old man handling the puppet. Besides his enormous talent, the old man seemed to be distant. He didn't seem to pay any attention at all, and his face was expressionless. I figured that must be a good thing for a ventriloquist, and he must have been doing this for decades now. Even though I kind of felt sad for the old man, I grinned broadly all the same. The jokes often were pretty inappropriate, but consisted of really accurate observations of society, which may have been his way to show his discontent for the people he met as a street performer over all these years. The tricks and stunts continued for around 10 more minutes until the puppet grabbed a handkerchief out of the old man's pocket, spread it out in front of itself, took a bow, and thanked the people for the attention before wishing a good evening to everyone. Some of the teenagers grabbed some change from their pockets and placed the money on the handkerchief while laughingly complimenting the old man. I too wanted to pay the puppeteer. In my eyes, that much talent and dexterity must not go unseen and unrewarded. While I was rummaging through my change, the puppet watched the teenagers carry on their way. I didn't think they'd give me money. Normally, these pricks aren't good for anything but malice. I lifted my head, looked at the puppet, and then watched the teenagers as well. Yeah, sometimes miracles really can happen. I laid my eyes on the puppet again, squat down, and looked at its workmanship. It was clearly very old, maybe even to be considered antique. The wood was split up on many parts, and the paint was chipped everywhere, too. It really looked the worse for wear. You're immensely talented. You know that, right? I asked, and out of curiosity, tried to touch the puppet's hand. Immediately, I got slapped by the wooden doll. "Hands off, buddy. Who told you you could touch me, huh?" The puppet snarled. I didn't think much of it. The puppet was old, and the old man's subsistence seemed to depend on it. I apologized and put €3 on the handkerchief. "Why are you sitting in the streets? With that talent of yours, you could easily perform at theaters." "Well, I like it here. The streets show me the real people, not the all-dressed-up snobs with their fancy wardrobe and opera tickets, thinking they're better than everybody." "I see. Well, nevertheless, you are very talented. My compliments." At this moment, I realized that I'd been talking to the doll the whole time instead of the old man. I looked at the man. "You can talk to me without the doll," I offered politely. Unless you don't want to break character." "No, he can't," the puppet replied. "But why?" "That's none of your damn business, buddy." For a moment, I almost got angry. The puppet's answers were as rude as the jokes it had told minutes ago. I decided to carry on my way, bowed down, wished a good evening, and went on without shedding any further thought about the puppeteer. Some 100 meters away, I came to an intersection, and as I looked left and right to be sure about the traffic, my heart took a dive. On the opposite side of the street, on the left, stood the old puppeteer. Again, he showed the same tricks and stunts, told the same jokes, but how on earth did he get there before I did? I may have just been walking slowly, but the old man did not seem to be light on his feet. I just couldn't take my eyes off him and his puppet as I walked slowly further. Even though we were at least 50 to 40 meters apart, I wanted to get as far away as fast as I could. At the exact moment I was to walk around a corner and lose sight of the old puppeteer, his doll's head turned right at me. While the old man still had that absent, expressionless look on his face, his puppet stared right at me. For a fraction of a second, I was scared. Over the remainder of my way, I turned around all the time, always on high alert. I had the feeling of the puppet's eyes lying on me all the time, but no matter how many times I looked around, how much my head was tuning in every direction, and how much I tried to register anything and everything around me, I didn't see the puppeteer again. It was only at the club that I was able to shut down, and I tried to think of it as simple déjà vu. But my shivering hands told a very different story. The barkeeper asked me several times if I was all right, since she thought I looked pretty shaken, but she took my word for it as I told her I just had a stressful day. Slowly but surely, the incident with the old man fell from me. The later it got, the more relaxed I became, and in the end I was able to enjoy music, drinks, and company as if nothing ever happened. At around 4 a.m., I went on my way home. Being in a good mood again, I strolled through the streets of Berlin, heading for the central station. The temperatures had fallen low enough to make breathing visible. Not many people were still around, and the city itself seemed pretty quiet. Not far away from Central Station, however, I got that feeling of being watched again. I turned to all sides, nearly panicking. I wanted to ensure myself that it was just a trick played by my subconscious, but behind a tree somewhere around 100 meters in the distance, there was someone standing. I couldn't make out for sure who or what was standing there without them moving at all, but I knew it was the puppeteer, and he was standing directly in my way. No chance I meet that creep again, I thought to myself, and turned into a back alley to get around the old man and return to my route behind him. My legs were shaking due to more than just the cold air, and I had trouble keeping up my pace. Some 100 meters later, I wanted to turn again towards Central Station as I again found myself standing right in front of the old man. Standing only 10 meters away, his puppet eyes were staring again right at me. My breath stopped. All my senses screamed havoc. I wanted to run. Every muscle in my body was tensed up, and I shivered. "Good evening, buddy," the puppet said. "Are you cold? You tremble like an aspen leaf." I didn't know what this was all about. Was it supposed to be a serious question, or was it part of a disgusting kind of game? I just wanted to get out of here. The puppet spoke again. "Oh, look, you were pretty talkative back then. What is it that's left you speechless now?" It really started to annoy me that the old man only talked through the puppet. Having a distinctive style is one thing, but that made the whole situation only 1,000 times more menacing. My body started to prepare for a fight. I didn't seem to be able to escape him, and with flight being no option, confrontation was all that was left. I took a deep breath, and as I was about to say something, the puppet cut me off. "Don't even try, buddy. You wouldn't sound threatening at all right now. You shiver too much for that." The old man let the puppet walk up and down in front of me like a CEO at a presentation of sorts, still staring into space. "What the hell do you want from me?" "Nothing at all, buddy. I just want to talk." "Well, talk to me yourself then, instead of using that damn puppet." "Of course," the puppet replied. "But I already do." I swear my heart skipped several beats. My breath stopped, and I felt a sudden weakness running through me, just as if every muscle in my body stopped working. My eyes widened, and for the first time I looked close enough to see that the visible breath streaming into the cold air was coming from the puppet's mouth. Not the old puppeteer, but the puppet itself was breathing. Laughing, it pulled down its strings from the old man's hands, who sunk to the ground like a towel or bedsheet. He inflated, like he had not a single muscle or bone in his body. My legs gave up, and I fell to the ground, unable to scream due to sheer terror. Hitting the asphalt must have sent an adrenaline rush through my body, because I got up and as fast as I possibly could, I ran. I ran to the station, to people, and found the most crowded area I could find. It was only as I boarded the train and it began moving that I got a little more calm. It was only by chance then, when I looked up out the window and saw the puppet and the old man standing there. The puppet smiled at me and waved goodbye. My work takes me all over, but the strangest place I've ever been is a little town called Prey, Texas. I drove past city limits just as the sun sank below the horizon. Golden light pooled in the worn leather of my passenger seat, and I squinted to read a chipped welcome sign. Prey, Texas, home to 81 souls. I shook my head. Folks in these small towns were always so sanctimonious. People were souls. Everyone wished each other a blessed day, and the radio played only breathless preaching. As if on cue, the country music jangling from my car radio faded to static, then resolved into a familiar intonation that promised fire and brimstone to those who sinned against God. I turned the volume off. It took only a moment to reach what the locals would no doubt refer to as downtown, a row of perhaps 5 storefronts, at least one of which seemed permanently closed. I pulled to a stop in front of what looked to be a bar and climbed down from my truck. Heads turned as I walked in. A handful of people, mostly older men, glared at me from chipping tables placed randomly throughout the small room. Though I couldn't make out their expressions in the bar's dim light, I imagined that they all wore some variation of a John Wayne scowl. Indifferent, I settled into one of the empty stools at the dark wood bar and raised a hand. After a few moments, the bartender, an older gentleman with more hair on his weathered face than his head, ambled over and, without looking me in the eye, said, "What'll it be?" "Whiskey, for me." Wordlessly, he pulled a brown bottle from behind the bar. It had a generic brand name of the sort meant to be glossed over, something like Kentucky Jim or Old Dale. The aging bartender poured a measure of the stuff into a dirty glass, then dropped it in front of me, without mentioning the price. "What do I owe you?" I asked from beneath an arched eyebrow. "5," he responded, in a reedy tone that didn't match his gruff exterior. I fished $6 in ones from my wallet and slapped them onto the dark wood. "What's your name, pal?" I asked. "Joe," he responded, making a show of polishing a dirty glass with the rag over his shoulder. "Well, hey there, Joe. My friends call me Bub." "Bub." He repeated my name and raised his eyebrows. "That's short for something?" "Sure is," I told him. "Just like Joe is short for Joseph." He didn't respond, so I continued. "Joseph, do you have any sense of where a man might find a bed around these parts?" "I suppose you could try Miss Mary's down the road." His expression turned sour. "How long are you planning to stay, Bub?" "Thanks for the whiskey, Joseph." I slugged what remained in the glass and stood from my stool. Several pairs of eyes followed me out the door. As I left, I heard a deep voice say, "Have a blessed day," and I grinned. Miss Mary's was indeed just down the road, as the bartender had indicated. It was even marked with a sign reading Miss Mary's in a curlicue font that reminded me a bit of the Live, Love, Laugh signs that hung in too many kitchens the world over. I parked in a small dirt lot and took a moment to marvel at the crumbling mansion. Then I knocked on the door. A deep woof sounded from inside, but otherwise all remained still. I waited a few moments, then knocked again. Just as I turned to walk back to my pickup, though, the door creaked open, and an impossibly wrinkled head poked out. "You must be Miss Mary," I smiled. "I hear you're the lady to come to around these parts for a place to stay." "Well then, you heard right, Bub." She grinned toothily and opened the door. I thought it rude to ask how she knew my name, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't set me on edge a bit. My worries were quickly forgotten, though, as Miss Mary ushered me inside and commenced fussing over me in the way women of her generation were taught was proper. "We'll get you settled in upstairs, and then whenever you're ready, you come on down for dinner." She smiled wider, and her sharp blue eyes all but disappeared into the folds of her skin. The old woman showed me to my room, and I settled in just as she'd asked. After a while, I came down to find her setting out plates and silverware on a massive wood table. At her insistence, I took a seat and waited for her to bring out the food. A menacing growl rumbled from under the table, and I scooted back a bit in my seat to get a look. A tremendously fat Labrador stood by my feet, hackles raised, still growling. "Jefferson, that's quite enough," the old woman returned with 2 plates, each piled high with food, and shooed the corpulent beast from the room. "Not even the dogs are happy to see me around," I chuckled, doing my best not to betray any nerves. "Oh, don't mind these folks," she replied, placing a plate in front of me and doddering around the table to her seat. "Our town has a long tradition of mistrust." "Is that right?" I waited for her to go on. "Indeed it is, Bub." I nodded, and that was all the prompting she needed to launch into her tale. "See, pray wasn't always pray," she began with a practiced cadence. "This little town used to be called Jefferson, just like that old mutt." She gestured to the lab, who had stationed himself just outside the dining room. "The story goes
that when the Dust Bowl swept through Texas, the folks of this town prayed for deliverance. But it wasn't God who answered their prayers. Instead, the devil himself came to Jefferson and offered to make a deal.
She kept the same joyful smile as she spoke, but her voice cracked a bit.
Do you know what that deal was, Bub?
I'm sure I don't, Miss Mary. I lied.
The people of Jefferson promised the devil the souls of their offspring if he would deliver the town from ruin. And the old devil agreed. He promised that the very next day the townsfolk would know prosperity like they'd never seen. But he also promised that he would be back in 81 years, 1 year for every soul he spared that day. And he would take the souls of anyone he found left in town.
She let the final word trail off into what she no doubt imagined to be a spooky whisper. Well, that's quite a story, I laughed. Did the devil make good on his promise?
Well, if the story's true, he certainly made good on the first part.
She smiled and gestured vaguely to the crumbling mansion around her.
On my 9th birthday, the day after folks say the old devil came to town, the people of Jefferson struck oil, and a great many of us have indeed prospered.
I smiled. So, why did they change the name of the town then? She nodded.
Well, like I said, the devil made good on that first part of his deal. But ever since, we've been praying he don't make good on the second part. So, we named the town Pray, and that's why folks around here tend not to trust strangers. They think there's a chance that anyone who comes through town is the devil, back to take his due.
Well, how about that? I laughed again, and the dog whined from the hallway.
Every town has its stories.
Her smile faded a bit.
I suppose the people around here just take ours a bit more seriously than most.
She eyed her plate disapprovingly.
Bub, you haven't touched your plate.
I ignored the old woman and stood. From the hall, I heard the dog's labored breathing as it struggled to skitter away. Miss Mary, if you don't mind my asking, how old are you? I walked over and placed my hands on her ancient, stooped shoulders.
Funny you should ask, Bub.
She sighed.
But you know that I'm 90 years old, don't you?
It's been a long time, Mary, I answered. Happy birthday. I took the old woman's soul first. She was the last person left alive from the first time I visited Pray. The rest of the townsfolk put up a little more fight than she did, but when the sun came up, Pray wasn't much more than a pile of ashes in the desert. Just another dead Texas town where the well ran dry. My work takes me all over. But the strangest place I've ever been is a little town called Pray, Texas. See, Pray is the only place they were expecting me.
I was sitting up, holding my head in my hands. I was in so much pain. The nurse said I'd passed out at school and been sent here. She literally said that. Not that I was sent to a hospital. I was sent here. The lights blinded me, and I noticed a doctor walk through the door. I don't know how I knew he was a doctor. I guess only from the white coat he wore. He had no equipment and carried no clipboard, but I knew he had to be a doctor. I hoped he had some painkillers for my head. I hoped he'd come over to me. But instead, he merely led the boy from bed 1 out of the room. It was only about 3 hours later I realized something. I'd been sleeping for 2 hours, as advised by the nurse, but the boy still hadn't come back. Bed 1 was empty. I was confused by this, but there was no reason to ask. I felt like death, and the nurse wasn't here, so she instead feeded the boy opposite me like a baby. 4 more hours. It was dark now, around 10 p.m. It was cold, even though the nurse insisted the heating was on. The lights were still blinding, and then the doctor returned. He noticed a girl sitting in bed 2, looking lightheaded and as pale as snow. I could almost imagine the cold touch of her hand. The doctor made a signal, one that said, "Follow me." The girl rose to her feet beside him, obviously unstable, yet he didn't help her. He left that to the nurses, as the ill girl was taken from the room. After 1 hour, I felt nervous and tapped the nurse next to me on her shoulder. "Excuse me, but where did that boy go?" I asked politely. "Sorry, patient confidentiality," she stated. She saw my disappointed face and leaned closer towards me. "Okay, but you can't tell the other nurses." I nodded as she began. "The boy in bed 1, Taylor, he was incredibly ill. He's been here days and not gotten better. The doctor decided he needed a 6-hour-long operation. Unfortunately, Taylor died within the 4th hour." I sighed and looked away. "What about the girl in bed 2? The nurse sighed, as if trying not to give out too much information, but began again anyway. "Jessie was admitted yesterday. She's just gone for a checkup." I nodded to show I'd understood and grabbed my head in pain. "Are you okay? Would you like some morphine?" I was about to decline when the headache hit again, and without questioning, I nodded my head. I felt the scratch of the needle on the skin of my arm, then immense pain as the needle felt like it had passed through it. I didn't know what time it was. I'd been asleep, apparently. The morphine had made me more tired, and this late the nurse didn't seem surprised. I noticed bed 3 was empty, but had no strength to ask or get the nurse's attention. I felt weak, sleepy even. I recognized the doctor from before, standing at the door and talking to a nurse, before approaching bed 4. Then, like the others, the boy disappeared from the ward, and everything seemed cold. I was the only child here. All the nurses were wandering aimlessly. That was until a boy reached the door and was helped into bed 6. 4 hours. I reached out for the nurse, but she either ignored me or didn't notice. I was stronger than before, but still felt pretty weak. I managed to sit up and noticed bed 1, still empty, but the boy was dead. Bed 2, maybe the girl was discharged. What about bed 3 and 4? "Nurse," I managed to call, and the same nurse who spoke to me earlier rushed to my side. "What happened to beds 3 and 4? The nurse sighed again. 10 minutes. Wait 10 minutes, okay?" I frowned at the nurse, shaking a little. "I want to know what happened," I said. "Danielle needed a scan. Philip needed to be put down. Now don't talk to me until after 10 minutes. The nurse walked off in a storm, leaving me confused. Bed 1. Taylor died on the operating table.
Bed 2, Jesse went for a checkup and never came back. Bed 3, Danielle went for a scan and still hadn't returned. And bed 4, Philip was put to sleep. Wait, it's illegal to put people to sleep. Then I sat up and realized the doctor was walking to my bed, and I wanted to scream. I tried, but my voice was dead. I was weak. I kicked and flailed, but I felt another immense pain in my shoulder and soon fell into a blackout. Beeping was my company. I forced my eyes open to a woman in a mask. I felt her holding my hand. My other was locked in place by my side, even though there was nothing to hold it there. There were machines and tools all around, which scared me. There was a blinding light positioned to stare right into my face. The woman's eyes were all I could see, a soft hazel color, yet they had a green tint. "You're being so brave," the woman said. "Where am I?" "Still here," the woman replied, and I could tell she was smiling beneath her mask. "Why?" "We're gonna make you better." "I only had a headache. I'm fine now." The woman laughed. "They all say that." I heard the door to my right open and swing shut. "That's just the doctor. Don't move your head." I tried, but it was stuck just like my arm. I felt so confused. I wanted to pull away from her hand holding mine, but I was frozen. The nurse kept staring directly at me. I don't want this. You don't have permission," I said quickly, my voice shaking. The woman laughed again. "It doesn't work like that, sweetheart." "What are you going to do?" I said quickly. "First, we need to inject another dose of something. You'll feel a sharp scratch, but that's all." A sharp scratch, then way too much pain. The feel of liquid on my skin. I managed to pull my frozen hands into fists. There was so much pain, yet I couldn't scream. "You lied," I whispered in pain. The nurse didn't reply, and suddenly there was the sound of a machine, something horrible that made my eardrums want to burst. "What are you doing?" I said. "Don't worry, sweetheart. Just keep still and focus on me." "No, get off. What are you doing?" "I promise you won't feel a thing." I wanted to scream, but something stopped me. The horrible sound matched the agonizing pain to follow. Something was digging deep into my forearm, and every time it moved slightly, agony filled me. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even cry. "What are you doing? Stop it, it hurts. What are you—" The pain was too much. My body ached with the effort to move, which failed no matter how many times I tried. "Don't worry, part 1 is nearly over." "Stop. What kind of hospital is this?" "This isn't a hospital, silly." The nurse laughed, and I heard the doctor join in a little. "Where am I?" "You're still here." I tilted my head back, but that did nothing to the pain. I still wanted to scream, and I wanted them to stop. I stared up at the light in front of me, and finally my voice released a petrified scream. "You're not here anymore," a whisper said. And then it hit me. Bed 1, Taylor died on the operating table. Bed 2, Jessie didn't get her checkup. Bed 3, Danielle never got a scan. Bed 4, Philip was put to sleep all right. I was in bed 5. And bed 6, the poor boy in bed 6, not much older than maybe 8, he was going to die. Die in a hospital where people are meant to be helped.
saved from the one thing they were giving us. But then again, this wasn't a hospital, although it may look like one. I didn't see the signs quick enough, especially the most obvious one. The doctor wasn't wearing a white coat. He was wearing a lab coat. Lily stared up from bed 1 into the dark ceiling. "Nurse!" A smiling nurse looked over. Lily frowned at her happy mood, but continued nevertheless. "What happened to the other people?" "I'm sorry. Patient confidentiality." "Please," Lily said. The woman sighed and leaned in with a secretive smirk. "Fine, but don't tell the other nurses." Lily nodded quickly before leaning in towards her. "The boy in bed 1 before you sadly died in an operation. The girl after that went for a checkup. Danielle in bed 3 got a scan. Philip had to be put down. Hannah was moved to a different ward." Lily looked across the room as the doctor called over the boy in bed 6. "Where's he going then?" The nurse was half frowning, half smiling. "Just wait 10 minutes, sweetheart."